Good evening, everyone. Thank you once again for taking the time to join us for another session where we get to speak with the author of One Husband, Two Men, Margaret Ong. Thank you so much for giving us so much of your time and being such a great advocate for our community. Today is the third session from the series that we have been hosting of 4 fundraising English chat sessions. We do have one upcoming Chinese session on 2nd March for our Chinese speaking caregivers. And our last English session will be scheduled for the 6th of April. Once again, just want to remind you that 40% of sales from the books purchased between now and April 2022 will be donated to CAL, and we're really, really grateful for that. We want to thank Word Image for their generous sponsorship to this fundraising campaign. And thank you to all of you for your support and wanting to be involved in our panels and attending. And I also look forward to seeing your questions. I encourage all of you to please type your questions in the Zoom chat. The chat will be monitored by our team here at CAL. And we will ensure that all participants are respected and your queries will be handled in a safe manner. We also seek your kind understanding in sharing the conversational space with others. Let's be considerate and mindful of the needs of fellow participants. Another reminder that this session is being recorded. So if anyone do not consent to being recorded, please exit and watch the recording, which will be available later online. Now, without further ado, I am going to jump into our topic this evening, which is destigmatization starts at home. More than 1 in 10 people globally live with a mental health disorder. Mental illness is the 5th largest disease burden at a global level. This is based in our world data in 2018. More than half of people with mental illness don't receive help for their disorders. And often people avoid or delay seeking treatment due to concerns about being treated differently or fear of losing their jobs and livelihood. A review of studies on stigma shows that while the public may accept the medical or genetic nature of a mental health disorder and the need for treatment, many people still have a negative view of those with mental illness. It can be a major barrier for people who are mentally ill to be forthcoming in getting treatment early. CAL advocates for transparent and unashamed conversation to speak openly about mental illness, not silence. And this evening, we invite participants on our panel, Margaret Ong, as well as her sons, Jeroemy and Ryan Ong, here with us this evening to discuss the topic, Destigmatization starts at home. Margaret, Jeroemy, and Ryan, thank you so much for doing this with us this evening. May I please invite you to say a few words about yourselves. Margaret?
Thank you, Nadia. Okay, I'm Margaret. I'm mother to Jeroemy and Ryan. And I'm also a caregiver to my husband, who is suffering from schizophrenia for 14 years. And I'm the author of this book.
Thank you, Margaret. May I invite Jeroemy to introduce yourself as well?
So hi, everyone. Good evening and happy midweek. Thank you for taking your time to join us. And I really hope that with this event, we can let fellow caregivers and patients as well know that you're not alone. And we can work together to help destigmatization, like what this topic is, starting from home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeroemy. Truly appreciate that comment as well. And we have Ryan, who is also from the family. Thank you for taking time out to join us this evening, Ryan.
Thank you, Nadia. Hi, guys. My name is Ryan. I'm a caregiver to my father, and I'm currently studying in uni right now at NTU.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ryan. So we're going to start off this evening with a a question that I want to address with regards to stigma. And so stigma affects both the caregivers and the loved ones who are diagnosed with mental health conditions. Based on your personal experiences in your family, would you be able to let us know how true you feel this statement is? Perhaps, shall we start with Margaret?
Yeah. People who have mental illness looks like you and me, looks normal. Unlike people with physical disability. And so, but the symptoms of people with mental illness, it's mainly mindless action. And those are behavioral. And when they are behavioral, it can be embarrassing, all right, to be associated with them. So clearly, there is stigma out there because people with mental illness, when they are not lucid and is in psychosis stage, they are not in control of their mind. Yeah. So clearly for us, do feel the stigma because the media also projects them in a different light, because the cases reported by media tend to be of violence and instill fear in public. And even though there is improved awareness of mental illness out there, but it's still at a superficial level.
Yes, I hear you, Margaret. And I'm in agreement. Based on personal experiences that for your sons, perhaps I can ask Jeroemy, how do you feel about your personal experiences around stigmatization regards to mental health?
Absolutely. Well, I think when there is a patient of mental health, the first people or people that are around them that will be affected will be your family, right? Be it a spouse, family members, siblings, children. And I think one of the things that I found out recently in my conversations with Dr. Ang Yong-Guan, who is a psychiatrist, is that there are two types of mental illnesses. One is a neurotic mental illnesses. Those are tension-based, depression, anxiety, panic attacks. And then you have more psychosis-based mental illnesses, which are like schizophrenia, which my dad suffers from. I believe bipolar might be also considered a psychosis. And one of the things that he commented is that generally the public does sometimes view that neurotic illnesses are less severe. So they face less stigmatization because they would think that depression or anxiety attacks is not as severe as schizophrenia. So I do think that because of society's perceived conceptions about mental health illnesses, if you are a family member or you're a close friend of someone who's suffering from it, you would definitely be impacted by it as well, based on their symptoms and how they react to this illness.
Thanks, Jeroemy. Now, just to follow on to what you just said, what do you consider is more harmful in your opinion? Public stigma or self-stigma?
To be honest, I feel that it's self-stigma is more important or more severe because self-stigma starts with yourself first. Public is secondary, right? If you can't stop condemning yourself or stigmatizing your own self, you cannot expect the public to not do so. And I truly feel that with combating with destigmatization, it first starts with individual. We need to be more outspoken about it. We need to be more confident about it and not allow it to beat us down. And only then, when we start with setting an example, we can expect or encourage the public to join in this movement as well.
Thank you, Jeroemy. Ryan, if I can get you to weigh in, I would love to hear how do you overcome stigma and what mindset shift was required to help you with your destigmatization process?
For me, it took a long time for me to overcome the stigma, as much of my earlier days of my childhood was spent blaming my father. I had to learn how to separate his illness from him and learn to understand that my father loved me and did not wish for things to turn out this way as well. This took a lot of change in like self-reflection, in learning more about the illness and him. And through the support of my family, I managed to change the way of my thinking.
That's really encouraging, and I'm sure there are a lot of us in the community who can relate to that in your journey as well. So thank you so much for being so open with us. Margaret, if I may just bring it back to you, how does extended family or friends play their part in this aspect of your life with regard to destigmatization?
Well, obviously, I count on a lot of extended family and close friend support. The acceptance by extended family and close friends are really important for us, because then it makes us feel like we are not being stigmatized. And it also provides a much safer and stable environment for the outgrowing years of my boys, because they were very young then. So I lean on my family, extended family, and I somehow wish that they were staying here in Singapore rather than in Malaysia. But those family support truly, I think, make my family feel so integrated and not being shunned away, because there is no fear of shame, because with family and friends, they appear with us in public places as well. And so for that itself, it provides a sense of normalization, like a family in the society as well with friends. So to me, those are truly important in the sense that to have this external support in the community rather than being alone out there. Yeah.
Thanks, Margaret. Now, we talked about public stigma and personal stigma, but there is something that I think it would be useful if I could have you sort of comment on. Can you share examples of institutional stigma that you have encountered and some of its complications, if you have an example for us?
Yeah, I definitely have a personal experience to share. I recall an event, a corporate event of my ex-company, Hewlett Packard. There was a 2-day worldwide senior leadership meeting in the US Bay Area, and that was back in 2012. Because I have made the decision to prioritize the treatment for my husband, I decided not to go for that meeting, the global meeting. And I decided to inform my boss then that I was unable to attend the meeting because of my personal circumstances. Now, obviously, it was not well received. And my boss also did not ask for details at that time. So I took away 2 things from that. One is that it is my problem, as I did not share my challenging caregiving journey with him earlier. Secondly, this boss was relatively new with the company, and we had not had the opportunity to develop a familiar relationship as yet. And however, it was also clear that he lacked empathy. He probably thought that I was making an excuse not to attend the event. All right. Now, we know most companies prioritize productivity. And it takes a lot for companies to embrace and be understanding of such a personal circumstances that's not within our control. And so I think it sometimes needs to be within the culture of a company to embrace diversity of disability of any form, and not every company has that. Now, institutional stigma is systemic, I would say, because it involves policy of government and private organizations that potentially limit opportunities for people with mental illness. For example, being disqualified from insurance coverage or plan because of pre-existing mental health conditions. And as a result, less mental health coverage relative to other health problems or illnesses out there. There's also discrimination in job applications, with application forms asking, are you suffering from mental illness? Or do you have a family member suffering from mental illness? And I think that is a form of discrimination, because I have known of cases of individuals that when they tick yes, they were penalized, meaning that they were not shortlisted for an interview. However, when they lied about it, they were given a shot at the interview. All right, so it is very obvious that there is a stigma and a discrimination for people with mental illness. So embracing diversity, I feel, is not instituted in most organizations because we place top priority in productivity and output. And furthermore, employers must be willing to tolerate the downtime of relapses, which is part and parcel of the illness.
I completely agree. And I also, hopefully, you know, with more advocacy and discussions such as what we're doing this evening, we can educate the public, and it will affect change in organizations. I mean, I can completely resonate with what you just spoke about, because, you know, I come from a family and with a history of mental illness, and I'm sure there are a lot of our community members within the audience tonight that can relate to the struggles that we face. I know what it's like, where there are certain examples or certain situations where, you know, a company would say, we would allow you to set aside time for maternity leave, but family leave or family time off is a concept that is still quite new, which I thankfully can see a lot of MNCs taking on, and hopefully that will spill over into the organizations here in Singapore.
Yeah.
So thank you for being a champion of that. I would like to start questions for the family now, because I'm starting to see some come in on the Zoom chat, which is excellent. So please, our viewers, please do type your questions into the Zoom chat, and we will get through them as quickly as possible. So we have a question here for your sons, Jeroemy and Ryan. When you first got to know about your dad's mental health condition, have you ever resented your father? If yes, do you still resent him? If no, how did you gradually move on and separate him from his illness? If I may ask, Ryan, would you like to get the ball rolling on this point?
Yeah, sure. I felt like when I was younger, I definitely did resent my father during the early stages of his illness. However, like, much has changed since then, as I realized like it wasn't his fault. Changing my mindset took really long, but what really helped me to separate him from the illness was like, there were various times when I visited him at my father at IMH, and there were times that I could see a glimpse of his old self, where he would show love and affection to me and my brother. And I think this really helped change my mindset about him and see him as my father instead of the illness.
Thank you for your honesty, Ryan. Jerome, can you let us know how the journey has been for you?
Well, I think for me, I was the opposite. I actually did not resent my father. Growing up, I think I was much more confused as to, you know, how did he get this illness? How do you contract it? What are some of the triggers? And, you know, there was a lot of questions, right? And I think that's why it starts also with the social stigma. It's very strong, because I realize in an Asian society that we live in, we do not embrace, and it's a subject of taboo. And most of the times it was hard to share with family or friends, because the first thing that they will ask is it hereditary? Would you get it? Which I think that is a very wrong question to start asking. You should be asking more of what are the symptoms, you know, what is the illness, to have a better understanding. For me, I was more confused because after understanding a little bit more of the illness, we realized that my dad's trigger was career related or job related. And as a young boy growing up, I could not understand, right? Like, how could you let a job or career ruin you, like make you fall ill? So growing up and now at the age I am today, I do actually, thinking back, understand my dad's perspective, because growing up, there is a society expectation on males. I think there is some sort of stereotype that you need to have a good paying job, you need to be the breadwinner of the household. I know that in this current generation, we are slowly deviating from that, but I think it sort of builds subconsciously, right? Because when you go around meeting your family, extended family members, your friends, most of the time, their breadwinners are the fathers or the males in the families, and they have that particular role. And I believe it builds an image subconsciously. And I think it also, I could bring up this example. I'm not sure who has seen this picture on Facebook or Instagram whatsoever, but I remember seeing this picture on Facebook of this animation. And it was a drawing of a mother with her child, and she was pointing to a cleaner on the roadside saying, if you do not study, you will end up like that cleaner. And I feel like such impressions of building from a young age will actually lead you to have such an expectation. So if you do not meet your self-expectation or society's expectation of you of a successful career in numerical form or in title, it becomes very susceptible for mental illnesses. So I would say that growing up in different phases, I struggled with different feelings or emotions dealing with my dad's illness. If anything, if I had to be honest, I was much more frustrated, or I actually resented my mother a little bit more. Why? Is because for me as a young boy growing up, I felt like it was unfair towards me. My mom should have stopped working. And I think that this would lead to the previous question that you shared on institutional help, because I feel like there should be no one that should decide or have to choose between continuing to work to support their family versus giving up my job, but I would not be able to provide my family members with that needed care or medication that they will require. And to top it off, I think for all the caregivers out there, there is caregiver burnout, and sometimes dealing with some patients of mental illnesses, be it your family member or siblings, can be extremely exhausting, right? And if you're juggling a job, juggling studying, it can be a burnout, and you might become a patient yourself. So I do think it's very important for institutions to add more respite care as an option. We have dog daycares now. I have a dog. We send him for daycare every now and then. And I think that we should have such facilities for mental health patients, for them to just go there, receive respite care, teach them how to integrate back to society, how do they deal with currencies, exercise, sports, play chess, have some mental exercises, and then they can come home and they will be a little bit more refreshed and different, right? And it will help them to integrate back to society.
Thank you so much for that response, Jeroemy. I mean, I related on a visceral level. And I'm sure there are a lot of people in our community that's listening this evening that can totally relate to that as well. So really, thank you. I'm completely on the same page. Actually, if I could just go back to Ryan for a bit, I have a question here, which is quite interesting, and I would love to hear your side as well, because I remember what it was like for me growing up with a sister, and trying to understand, and my family trying to navigate how best to provide help for her. So Ryan, how did your father's condition affect you as well as your brother when you were growing up? And specifically, were you able to talk to your friends about it?
I feel like when I was younger, in primary school, I wasn't able to talk to much people about it. And in fact, I was kind of ashamed of my father's condition. And at that age, children are not really mature enough to understand. So I kind of kept it to myself. And growing up, it took me a long while before I could invite friends over to the house, like friends who were mature enough to understand that my father had a condition and he sometimes would act out. So I think only when I was 16 or 17, then I could start having friends over and like telling some friends about my father's condition. And I'm thankful that those friends were mature enough to understand and they were accepting of my family's situation.
I'm really happy that you managed to find a safe space with some of your friends. What was it like for you, Jeroemy?
I think for me, I was a much more vocal person growing up. I think Ryan can attest to that. Since young, I was a lot more noisy. So for me, what I would say my experience was that when I was in secondary school, I did share with some friends. However, I think with Ryan, the experience was the same when you have friends who are at that age, right? They're 12 years old, 13 years old. They're not mature. They do not understand. And one of the comments that actually hurt me growing up was there was once, because I did not invite friends to our house in the past in fear of my dad acting a certain way and them finding out. So there was once where my mom convinced me, she said, you should not be afraid. Just invite your friends over. And if anything, you should explain to them. It is in your responsibility to explain to them to spread awareness. So I did that. And unfortunately, what happened was one of my friends saw my dad. I think he was acting in a certain way. And one of the comments or questions that they asked me was, is he crazy? Now that definitely did hurt me a lot, especially as a boy who was 13 or 14 years old. But however, I felt like I took the perspective where if you were my true friend, you would have the intellectual or maturity capacity to understand and try to find out more and be understanding to try to be there as a friend instead of make, immature or passing comments that were not helpful. And I do agree with Ryan as well. As we grow older, and for me now, 26, most of my friends do understand, because I think we are at this current generation where it's being talked about a little bit more and they are aware of mental illnesses and it's not a laughing matter. So I would say that it comes with age. And I do think it does start with the self-confidence or esteem to not pull yourself back, to take yourself away from social situations and to constantly hide it, because I think that's where the problem starts.
That's fantastic, man. I mean, I grew up in the 90s and I remember feeling that kind of anxiety at school and having schoolmates not quite understand, and also being worried whether or not it was okay to have friends over. But I truly am so grateful to see, times are changing and conversations are happening and we're more open about it. And I'm really glad to see it in my lifetime. So thank you to you and your family for being such wonderful advocates for our community. If I can just bring it back to Mom, Margaret. I do have a question from the panel, for the panel. It has been said that to break stigma, it starts at home. What do you think, and how did you start that with your boys?
Well, for one, if the core family members cannot accept the loved one with that illness, it is very difficult to expect the society or anyone in the community to accept your loved one. So it has to start from the core family members. And it is our, I think besides being a duty, but it's your core family members. Don't you love them enough to really make it a point to understand what is going on? I think that is utmost important. So for me, I think when I decided that, it is a brain illness, I accepted it. But obviously it takes a lot to get myself educated, because in those years, it's not so pervasive, the information. And at that time, when I got to know Cal was just being infected for a year. So it's still, at a stage where they are trying to grow in membership, to reach out to all the caregivers out there in various platforms, right, of communication. So I was one of the fortunate one where I have a platform where I get to know about the mental illness, how to be a caregiver, how to take care of myself. And I supplement it with information out there, researching. And simply, once you have accepted that it is a brain illness, then I feel committed to do what I can to basically improve the quality of my husband and my family as a whole. And only then I can look at ways to stabilize my husband's condition, making sure that it is a priority that he gets treatment. And with that, then I can have the hope of having a functional family instead of a dysfunctional family. And to me, if we are continuously being dysfunctional, how would our neighbor or the community accept us? I think even for us, it's difficult to lift our head up high because there will be fear of shame and all kinds of, you feel insecure to stand tall, out there with your neighbors, with the community in general, right? So I feel that, it was only right that it starts with us to do what we can. And with that, we can safely advocate to others, to destigmatize the illness.
That's really heartening to hear. Thank you very much, Margaret. You reminded me of a conversation I had with my mom when I was a teenager, and my sister and I were bickering, and then my mom had to sit me down. She was like, Nadia, you can't be embarrassed of her. She's your sister. We are her family and we need to support her. And that helped me in my journey of trying to understand more about my sister and also how to provide a loving home for her and help her navigate her illness. To that point, I'm going to segue to a question that I got from the chat, and I'm hoping that perhaps Ryan, you can start with this one. We have someone who is a 21-year-old primary caregiver living with her mom who has schizophrenia. She feels that her mom is in denial of her condition, and the daughter who is the caregiver is struggling as she has no power over mom as a daughter. Now, everybody's situation is different, but I think if you could, Ryan, and then after that we can ask Jerome as well, what advice would you have for this 21-year-old?
What advice I would have would just be not to give up. We understand like the caregiving journey is really tough, and I mean, for me personally, I went through it when I was sort of younger. So I may not have much responsibilities that time when I was a kid, like 14, 15. Other than school, I had to just come back and take care of my dad. And I understand that if I was put in such a situation now when I'm 21 with so much responsibilities, it would be a really tough journey. But the only advice I can give is to not give up hope.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Jeroemy, do you have something to say?
Yeah, I think definitely it is a very difficult situation when we are dealing with a family member or patient that has no insight, right? My dad was the same. He never acknowledged that he was ill. He had schizophrenia. We had to see the doctor on his behalf. And I remember my mom and I, we would have to write on a notebook, a consolidated notebook when I was younger, just to kind of keep track what was his behavior every single day, track what was his response to this amount of medication. Does this medication work? And it's definitely a very difficult journey because it's not something that I'm going through. I think that one thing about mental illnesses that we have to acknowledge is that it's very hard to understand. Unless we are going through it, I believe it's very hard to put ourselves exactly in that person's shoes to really understand. Like for example, I have friends who go through depression and sometimes they are going through downtimes. And I already go through this kind of situations at home, but sometimes when they still verbalize it to me, I cannot fully put myself in their shoes, right? And I think one thing to understand is that sometimes it is not blaming, separating the person and understanding that illness makes them incapable of making that decision. I felt that that was one point that helped me to feel better or cope better, knowing that it's not a personal decision, they cannot help it. The second thing that I would like to maybe give some advice is that, there is a certain level that you can do to help a patient, right? I think all caregivers can, we can do the best that we can, but we should not beat ourselves up for it if this patient does not want to receive treatment or it's still being in denial and being very stubborn. We have to kind of also find this point where we have to loosen our grip a little bit and just do what we can to increase the quality of life of this patient. And also, I think the most important thing is do find a good support group, a good circle of friends that can help to take your mind off this situation. Don't feel like you're trapped and constantly thinking about it all the time, ruminating about it all the time. Sometimes separate yourself out of this situation, take a break. I mean, I know that COVID is restricted our travel, but if you want to go and take a vacation, go and see some friends, I think that would be one advice, because it's hard to solve the psychological portion or the chemical imbalance portion of it. But I think what we can change or try to help with is how we cope with it as a coping mechanism.
Thank you so much, Jeroemy and Ryan, for your words of encouragement. I'm sure we can all relate to caring for somebody in our family, and you know, when you're in your early 20s, or for some of us much younger. So whoever this caregiver is that gave us the question, thank you very much for the question. We really appreciate it. And as what Ryan said, don't give up. And I really hope that you have your support group and learn to have boundaries and not be so hard on yourself, just like what Jeroemy said. Now, I have a question here, and I'm hoping to flag it to Margaret. I believe it is Eileen who typed into the chat and said, I know someone with schizophrenia spectrum disorder. Her husband has passed on, but when I discussed with my husband's family, they were in denial. So it doesn't help her much. How can our society, in your opinion, be more well educated and acceptable so mental illness patients can be well treated? Margaret? Oh, Margaret, we need you to unmute, please.
All right, sorry. I have a similar situation myself. Okay, my in-laws are also in denial, pretty much till today, because they do not want to talk about my husband's condition, nor even ask questions to get an update of how he is doing. And even if I offered, without further probing, it will just be a very short conversation of how is my husband doing currently in the hospital. So it is difficult. I made it an attempt to share as much information as possible, to talk about the illness, to talk about the treatment that he's been through, and also to share what I have learned as a family, how we cope. Unfortunately, you can only do your best. You share because you wanted to raise awareness, to raise the understanding level beyond superficial, to give people more insight. But if the other party chooses to be in denial, I think it's not your responsibility to change that. Because sometimes when the people are in denial, it's because they are self-preserving themselves. Like if I look at my mother-in-law, my husband is the only son and the youngest in the family. And I believe pride and shame and stigma, the self-stigma, has a lot to do with this denial. And you can't change that. You can't force a lot of information. It depends when they're willing to open up, when they're willing to accept it, to process it, to make sense of it. So, but you shouldn't stop sharing facts about the illness and all that. But when they will accept that and receive it and embrace that, it's really up to them.
Thank you for that, Margaret. I actually have one more question for you. When you decided to write and share about your caregiving journey, how receptive were the rest of the family members? Were there any resistance from the rest? You just touched on that briefly. And why do you still go ahead in spite of the resistance that you face?
Obviously, my core family members, my two boys, I did ask how they feel about me writing all this. And they were pretty supportive about it. However, with my husband, when I was writing it, he has no concern. But when I was about to publish it, I asked for permission to publish it. He did not consent to it. Until I said, I'm only going to publish it to raise funds for CARE. And it will only be limited to 500 copies. And he said, okay. And I have involved him in the process in the sense that when the book cover's design was in the process, I actually asked him, which book cover will you choose at that time in the first launch? And he chose the blue cover and that design. He saw the wordings on it and he said, yes, this is the one that I like. All right. And at that time, because I self-published, when the publisher sent me copies, okay, of the print, the sample copy, he received it and he knew it's the book that I was going to launch. He didn't do anything to destroy that, unlike what he did with fines that came for our cars being impounded, the fines that came to say that we park in places that we should not be parking. He tear off those fines and I had to go to the court. But with this book, he did nothing to destroy it. So I was surprised because he kind of honored it. He refused to read it because he said the book, he knew all about him. There's no need for him to read the book because it's all about him. He already knew about himself. So that was the thing that I felt, it sort of tickled me as well, you know, how he gave consent to this. And he said what he said, he gave his consent, but he's not willing to read the book. So again, I could not explain the psychology behind that, but I accepted that at face value, that, you know, I had his support for donation's sake. Yes.
That's wonderful. I mean, I I remember a time with my sister, when I told her that I was doing advocacy work, my sister said to me, yeah, no, it's fine. It's good. It's good that you're doing it, so that other people know what it's like growing up with what I have, and they won't look down on people like us. And when she said that, I almost burst into tears because I was so proud of her for being able to say that. And it's just, gosh, thank you for you know, being such advocates. I said that a million times, but I truly do mean it. So Ryan and Jeroemy, I have another question from you. As a child or growing up, you know, not a specific age, what would have been the acceptable term that you would prefer others to use if they have to describe your father? Ryan, do you want to start first?
Sure. I don't think I have any specific term in mind actually, because I mean, before his illness, he's still a human being. I think any term would be fine as long as you are respectful. Yeah, there's no specific term in mind that comes to mind.
Jeroemy, you want to take that?
Yeah, I feel like as long as it's not an offensive term, right? Like mental illness, mental disorder, I believe are scientific terms, which are fine. Obviously, I would say that saying things like crazy would be extremely offensive, and you should not just label someone as crazy. I think that's generalizing. So I would say that if someone is speaking about it and describing it as a mental disorder, a health condition, I think those are acceptable terms or how that you would call someone. But I think, like what Ryan said, I believe it's very important that you first acknowledge that it's a person, right? That is a person. Call him or her by her name. And if you're addressing this topic, you can use those acceptable terms that I think in this day and age, society is quite sensitive. So as long as society accepts it, I believe it is okay.
Yeah, man, because when I was growing up, I remember I would correct friends. I think I was in my late teens, and I just started adopting the term special needs. My sister has special needs. We love her. She's a bit different. She just has special needs. I have a question here for you, Margaret, because we talked briefly earlier about how there are some of us caring for loved ones who have not fully acknowledged their condition or have a full understanding of it. So for your husband, how would you say his headspace is now? Has he ever gotten to a point where he fully understands or fully come to terms with his condition?
You know, I think it was a long process for him, but I recall probably I was sensitive to use the word your mental condition. And if I said illness, he would tell me, what illness? So all the while in the early years of his illness, I used your mental state, your mental condition. And subsequently, there was one period I remember I was evaluating alternative therapy for him, which involves using pure essential oil. All right. And I was explaining to him that I went and consult those people in the company, what concoction of pure essential oil would help to reduce hallucination, potentially, and help to relax him. And when I was applying that on him, and I was explaining that these are the concoction that is potentially can help him, you know, sleep, rest better, and potentially not hear voices because he had hallucinations. He actually asked me a question. How did they know I have schizophrenia? That was the one and only time he uses that term of his medical condition, schizophrenia. And I honestly told him that because I don't know what are the concoctions, I have to reveal that my husband is suffering from this mental illness, and I need help to know whether this alternative therapy would be able to help him with some of the symptoms of his illness. So when I explained that, I was only sharing to determine how to better help him. He accepted it. But that is the one and only time he uses the term that how do they know I have schizophrenia, right? So that's one. And the second time is when we talk about, you know, going for treatment in IMH versus being an outpatient with a private doctor. And I think now, you know, after being an inpatient as well as an outpatient, and going there for psychiatric as well as psychology therapy, he somehow is more acceptance of IMH, unlike in the past where he truly, you know, is dead against IMH as a place for treatment. Yeah.
And I have a follow-up question from the same person who asked you that question, Margaret. Would you say that now your conversations with your husband these days, do you get a sense that he does wish to be well or wish to recover?
I believe that, you know, the thing that about this mental illness is very unpredictable. And, you know, you may subject him to the best doctor there is. It is very difficult to predict the outcome. So we can only do the best to offer whatever resources, access to medical help, and the treatment that's out there. But eventually, I also feel that my husband is very prideful, and that probably stands, and that's probably why he's in denial, and it really stood in the way of his recovery. And the good thing about, you know, I shouldn't say this, but it's better than someone having delusion that is very frightening. My husband's delusion, like what Jeroemy mentioned earlier, it's all about career, all about his successes. It's of grandeur. So he's very happy to be in that deluded state. And so he spent a lot of time there. And it's not easy, even with all the treatment, even the gold standard of treatment given to him, was not able to crack that delusion, because he's very comfortable in that deluded space because he is successful. He's a winner. Everything his hand touches, it turns to gold. Nobody can touch him. So in a way, when I look at that situation, I would say, he accepted it, but he does not know that he's detached from reality. Because if Ryan, Jeroemy, and I were having conversation and we try to put him down and say, no, that's not real, there's no such thing, okay, or brushed it aside, straight away he will not wish to have any engagement with us. He would rather switch off and that's it. So we would kind of listen to a state that we feel that it might be too much for us, and it's time to switch the topic for him to talk about something else. So we kind of go with its flow, but when it's too much for us to handle, then we will introduce another topic of conversation with him.
If I may add, Nadia.
Yes, of course.
So I think it is true. One of the biggest obstacles I believe in any mental illness would be the first step, which is insight. So if a patient or someone doesn't want to acknowledge that they are facing this difficulty or this challenge, I would say that this is one of the biggest steps in dealing with a mental disorder or illness. Because number one, if a person has insight and they acknowledge it, then they would first seek treatment. They will be motivated to seek treatment. But in this case with my dad, because he has no insight, or actually I would phrase it differently, I think he does have insight, but he doesn't want to acknowledge it. Because I believe his illness is a little bit different because, for schizophrenia, it's a hallucination-based, psychosis-based illness, right? So as my mom said, my dad's delusions make him feel extremely good. So he creates this bubble, and it's like, if you are trying to tell him otherwise, you're bursting his bubble. It's like, you're making me miserable. Don't take this away from me. This is making me feel very happy. Unlike, for example, a very big advocate for mental illness, I think it's Professor Ellen Sachs. So she is a lecturer, I believe, in the University of South California. And she describes her delusions because she has schizophrenia as well. And she says that she would visibly see people with knives coming to stab her. So when you have a patient like that facing hallucinations that make her very uncomfortable, she would be motivated or incentivized to, seek treatment. Please give me some medication so that I will stop seeing that. My dad's perspective would be, why would you want to take that away from me? It makes me so happy. So he will start getting defensive about it, right? And I think one of the things that I still deal with, recently I visited him just before Chinese New Year, before IMH closed his visitation, was that when I have conversations with him, I think it's also important to address this, that dealing with patients with psychosis-based mental health conditions, most of your conversations with them might be dominated by delusions. So my dad will be telling me that he is, the CEO or big management consultant to Intel, and they are making 2 billion chips a day. Clearly, the numbers is not realistic, right? And it's an interesting conversation to have, because you have to play along, like my mom said, listen to him and not cut him off too early, because he'll be okay. All right, I'm done. I want to go back. So I feel like it's not that a patient does not want to be well in a case. It's more of the illness kind of prevents them from thinking logically, right? So the separation of your cerebral and your limbic and your middle brain, they cannot have critical thinking skills to understand that these delusions may not necessarily be good for me. So what they do is they focus on the hallucinations, and it's like, this makes me feel so good. I'm a CEO, I'm a billionaire, don't take that away from me. So I would say that there are different side effects of these hallucinations. So obviously, I think it was more of just the lack of capacity to understand it, being a patient, and not more of not wanting to be well or wanting to be well.
That's such a profound statement. Thank you for saying that. And that's really something all of us should be able to have a think about when we walk away from today's chat, because we talk about, how whether or not our loved one has come to terms with it, whether or not our loved one is compliant, but we also need to bear in mind that in some situations, and again, each patient goes through a different experience. We need to understand whether or not how in touch with reality, so to speak, they are, and whether or not their resistance is them or their illness. And that's such a good point. Thank you. Thank you so much for bringing that up, Jerome. Margaret, if I may just bring it back to you. I have a question here from Mona, and her question is, were there days or period of time that you felt that your husband was getting well or well enough? And if you are open to sharing, was there certain dosage of medication when he was well enough, or in your opinion?
Yes, I had honeymoon years after the onset. And you would know the signs that he is getting better because the psychosis will be far and fewer, and the intervals between the relapses will be stretched, will be lengthened. So that will be a sign that he is on a path to recovery. And when that time comes, you have to work very closely with the doctor, because it is time to take down the level of medication to reduce it. And it has to be gradual, because a sudden reduction will cause withdrawal symptoms for antipsychotic drugs. So you have to work very closely with the doctor, and sometimes your loved one may not share that with the doctor sometimes. So that takes a caregiver. Like in the case of my husband, he's in denial. So it takes a lot on me to be observant and note the patterns of change. And once I noted that, I work with the doctor. And then when the doctor is informed, typically the doctor will recommend a lower dosage going forward. Yeah.
Thank you. You know, Margaret, for your long and arduous journey as a caregiver, were there times, and I'm sure there were there times when you felt like giving up, or felt depressed and felt lost? What was the one thing that kept you going? And I think more succinctly is, how do you have self-care?
Oh, that's a lot of questions there. Okay, let me first talk about the fact that, have I ever considered of giving up? Yes, I did. And it was in the first 3 years during the onset period. And that was the toughest period to deal with. And I would say that the first, I only sent my husband for diagnosis like 8 months after, he exhibits all this traits of psychosis. That's because I couldn't grapple what hit me and what was happening to him. And I had to deal with my own emotions because I couldn't accept him for the fact that he has changed. He was not the man I had married, right? And so I focused on myself, my own emotions. And it took me a while to deal with that. And I tried to give up twice, threatening divorce, all right? But I realized the hope came to me when I overheard a conversation between my two boys. They were discussing, who will I bring along if I were to divorce my husband? Of course, Ryan said that I will bring Jeroemy along because I travel so much. I would not have time to take care of him because he was so young and dependent. He would be dependent on me still. But Jeroemy said, no, a mom would take you because you're younger. She will leave me behind to take care of dad. So when I heard that, it woke me up to not self-wallow, and on my being pitiful of myself, it woke me up and say, well, my kids are my hope. I have to be strong, and I have to hold his family together so that there's a future for them.
I appreciate you so much, Margaret. Truly, I do, for your sharing and for being so open with us. The reason why this hits home for me is obviously because I grew up in a household that is similar. I want to have a question that I'd like to direct to Jeroemy and Ryan. And Ryan, if I could get you to start first. Your mother rallied you and your brother to come together and, as a unit, as a family, go through the caregiving process for your father. Now that you're much older and you were the younger of the two, can you tell us what the overall experience has been like for you? And, you know, from the moment you realize that there's something different about your dad and having that conversation, if you can recall what it was like first time having a conversation with your mom, trying to understand your father's condition, Ryan, and, you know, what that journey has been like for you as a caregiver.
Wow, how the journey has been for a caregiver. I guess I found out when I was about 7, 8 years old. So I guess when I was young, I guess I didn't really understand like what was going on. My mom brought us to talk to the psychiatrists or doctors to talk about my dad's condition. And I think it took quite a while to like let it settle in and understand that how much different my life was going to be as compared to other kids who had like more normal upbringings. I would say it has been a fruitful journey, and I'm glad that my mom involved me when I was young, because now when I'm older, I understand more of what my mom was going through at the time. I mean, last time when I was young, my perspective was very strained. I did not understand. I only saw more of like myself, like how it affected me. I didn't see how it affected my brother or my mom. But I'm very thankful that my mom included me in this process. And yeah.
Thank you, Ryan. And it's really encouraging to hear. And I hope the other caregivers in this group who have been on a journey for their siblings or their loved ones from a younger age can also be able to see things from your perspective. Jeroemy, now you were the older brother growing up, and that very candid sharing that your mom just gave earlier about how she stumbled upon a conversation you were having with your brother. Ryan has told us his perspective. What was it like for you?
I think for me, when we first found out about my dad being ill, it was kind of a shock, because I was really young. I think when we first were informed about it, I was probably 11 or 12. And I recall that my dad was already displaying some funny behaviors. Like he would make me sit outside the door for hours because he has some suspicions that our neighbors are doing something to our water inlet outside the house. And the thing is, my dad is intelligent enough to know that if my mom found out about it, he would be in trouble. So he would specifically tell me, "You do not tell your mother." And you know, at that age, I would just listen. So I think it was a very confusing time growing up at that age, where I also acknowledge a growing boy, you have hormonal changes, you're dealing with puberty. And I also was very frustrated at times because I felt like, you know, like what Ryan said, I see friends around me and I felt like I was not having a normal childhood. And there were times where there was jealousy, there was frustration. And I think through all of that, one of the things that was really important was just communication, where, you know, there was, I mean, although I honestly do not remember that conversation that I had with Ryan, my mom just reminded us, but I think these little conversations does keep you going. And for me and my mom, we always communicate, you know, how are we feeling about something, you know, what do we want to do moving forward? And, you know, I think communicating as a family is very important. And I feel like I would not be the person that I am today if I did not go through the same experience. So I believe that it is important to kind of, you know, involve your family members or your children in this process, because my mom actually took us to see Dr. Ong, to see the various doctors that my dad went through. And I think that it was really informative because for me, it's going through those sessions. Number one, I pick up the skill sets of what is important when you go and personally see the doctor, what questions you should ask, how you should come prepared, like little things like that. How do you carry a conversation and understanding the illness a little bit better. I think it helped me to grow up much faster. And I believe it was a fruitful journey, like what Ryan said as well.
That's fantastic, gentlemen. I'm really happy to hear that. I mean, it definitely builds character. It's difficult. Adversity in general, or any type of challenges builds character. So I'm just going to bounce it back to Ryan real quick. I completely understand what it's like to grow up in an environment that makes you feel frustrated, makes you wonder why it's not like other situations why other people have so-called normal lives. Ryan, you started out being, if I may say so, you started feeling frustrated or confused with regards to your father's condition. At which point did the revelation become, okay, I'm accepting this is my father, and that because you said it so eloquently, you were like, my father's illness is not who he is. So can you talk about that time in your life where you were able to cross that bridge?
I don't think there's a specific age that I can say like at a certain age that it suddenly changed. I think it was more of a gradual change, and it took quite long for me to realize. It also took, I also had to mature as well a little to be more accepting of the whole situation. But I think it was more of a gradual change. Like after taking care of him for so long, then my mindset sort of shifted somehow. I can't put a specific date or time on it, but yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Ryan. Jeroemy, for you it was slightly different. You were getting frustrated or not quite fully understanding your mom's approach to being a caregiver to your father. When did you find that point where you were able to so-called reconcile with your mom? Because you said that there was a brief period where you were like, oh, I was angry with mom and she was working and blah, blah, blah.
I think this is quite a difficult question to answer because I believe there was many periods when I was growing up, being a teenager, having your hormonal changes where, when I'll get into arguments with my mom. Because I remember one incident where, I just completed my O-levels and my mom was going for a business trip. And, it was like, O-levels is that big thing in your life when you were at that age, that was the biggest obstacle ever. And I wanted to celebrate with my friends because all my friends were saying that we wanted to go out, and enjoy ourselves. And I remember my mom was like, okay, because that was my last paper. And she was like, you can't go out. You have to go and see Dr. Ong. And, bring this, and let him know about the situation, collect medication. And I remember I was angry because I was, a teenager. I was like, how can you just give me this event to let me just take time off and play? And back then she would tell me, it's your responsibility. It's, you're his son, you're the older son, it's something they need to do. And I believe there were situations like that happened a few times that made me really frustrated and in some ways resentful. I think the point where we both reconciled was that actually there was so many outbursts going on when we argued. I will start raising my voice. I'll bring up this example as all human beings do when we get emotional. And I think it got to a point where we sat down and really just hashed it out. Where I think my mom asked me, how do you really feel about the situation? Because we never had that conversation. We never asked each other, how do we feel about this? What was my thoughts growing up? So I think that after we had that conversation and really hashed it out, I told her that I was really angry with her for the decisions that she made. And I was really candid with it. After that point on, I think it helped to improve our relationship as well.
Thank you so much for being so candid. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Ryan. This is obviously a lot, and I appreciate that was a delicate topic, but I'm sure there are a lot of us in the community who can completely relate. And we kind of have to remind ourselves that it isn't a one-person journey, that as the family, we need to work as a team. So thank you for being so open and honest with us. I will try to move this in a slightly more positive light. So we have, as you know, a variety of caregivers listening in to our panel today. I do have a question. Perhaps, Margaret, you might want to touch on this. How do you manage your patients then? We have caregivers in our group who talk about how they have similar conditions with their loved ones, and it's tough to be patient with our loved ones. What would your advice be?
We have to learn to inject humor into our caregiving. For example, I do get frustrated last time when I saw that my husband constantly talked to himself, lip syncing. He's in a world of himself. And if I just tell him, cut it out, stop talking to yourself, it doesn't sink in well. So what I learned is, as an example, he always put on his earpiece, right? Bluetooth earpiece, and he will go to the window. He will be holding his phone and as though he's having a conference call. All right. And so what I did is I saw him doing that. And I feel that as caregiver, it's always healthy to snap them out of spending too much time in their hallucination or with their delusion. So I learned where to be creative in communicating with him. And I said, hey, you're working way too hard, you have been spending time having conference calls so busy. Hey, why don't I make you coffee? And then you can have your snack, you take a break. I think a break will be good for you. And he turned around, he looked at me, yeah, sure, why not? So he is happy, I'm happy. It just takes a little bit of creativity to take the frustration out. Imagine when I say, cut it out, wouldn't you? I mean, why are you talking to yourself all the time? I make him upset and I get even upset myself. So I learned to do this and I inject creativity in our conversation. And when I learned to laugh about things, inject humor. Example, when I wanted to go on house hunting to move, he said, you don't need to do that. I bought you a condo already. I said, yeah, you told me that every 3 months. And then after that, when I say, when are we going to move? You said, I sold that. I'm going to buy you another penthouse. And I will laugh about it. And he will laugh about it, right? Just like he tell me, I got you a Lexus. It's going to be delivered downstairs. I said, sure. I look forward to that. Okay, does it come with a driver or not? So injecting humor and all that, it does wonders to you, right? It's a means of health, self-care as well. So the patients would come with it. You will be much calmer. There is joy in caregiving as well. So I learned that because if not, I don't know how to maintain sanity, right? So we have to figure out for our own sake as caregiver and people around us, not just because we don't just wear the hat of caregiver, no. I have my 2 sons to take care of, right? I'm a mother and I have to go to the office and I have to face my colleagues and I have to face my employees. You have many roles to play besides just being a caregiver. So you have to figure out because otherwise you cannot function.
Absolutely. I am a huge advocate of coping with humor. Sometimes dark humor, but whatever gets you through the day. I share sentiments that we are seeing a lot of in our chat tonight. So much respect and so much appreciation for Margaret being such a great role model, representing our community of caregivers, and so much appreciation and encouraged by your boys, Jeroemy and Ryan. You guys truly are, and I agree with what they're saying in the group chat. You guys truly are a blessing to your parents for your willingness to be a part of this journey and support your father's care with your mom. I do have an interesting question for the boys. I don't like saying boys, you're all fully grown men. So for the gentlemen in the group, I do have questions for you. If I may start with Ryan again. If you could rewind and start all over again, is there anything that you would like to have changed in your process, in this journey?
I guess if I could rewind and start all over again, one thing I would change would be to be more understanding. I guess in my younger years, I didn't deal with the problems at home very maturely. I was very rebellious, and I think my mom wrote about this in her first book. Like, there was a point in primary school that I just didn't want to go to school anymore. Like, I didn't want to be around people in general. So I would just forge my parents' signature and I would just not go to school for like, I didn't go to school for quite a while until my mom found out because the teachers called. And I guess, yeah, if I had to redo it all again, I guess I would try to be more understanding towards my mom. I guess when I was young, it's hard to see the different perspectives when you're so narrowed down by your own.
I feel you. Jeroemy, what would you have done differently? Or if you could turn back time?
This is a very difficult question. I think one of the two things that I would change is, one would be that I would have communicated with my mom way earlier, if possible. I think it's important to kind of have that clear communication line with your family members, to be very open about your feelings, about how you feel about certain situations. And, you know, maybe if I spoke to my mom earlier, you know, it might have convinced her to do otherwise, right? Who knows? I think the second thing is more of not changing, but being more, like what Ryan said, understanding. Because I think I cannot help it. And to be honest, even if I rewind back time, I would not be able to change it in the way that I speak of it right now. But I believe that it's in different phases, that we have different perspectives, and the journeys and the things that we go through will influence our thought process, influence our perspectives. So I wish that I could be more understanding, put myself in my dad's shoes, put myself in my mom's shoes when I was younger. But I believe even up to now, I may not fully be able to relate. Maybe until when I'm at my mom's age at 50 plus. So I think it's more of a progressive, ongoing journey of just trying to be more understanding, to, you know, try to put myself in other people's shoes, put myself in Ryan's shoes, put myself in my mom's and my dad's shoes, and just keep going forward. And I think the biggest takeaway is to not just think about yourself.
Guys, thank you so much. But, you know, there's something that is said in the group chat, and I 100% resonate with, is do not fault yourself for your immaturity. You guys were young, and, you know, I know what it's like growing up in a household like that. And ultimately, and not just for Jeroemy and Ryan, and I'm sure Margaret can attest to this as well, we have to remember to be kind to ourselves as much as we want to be kind towards our loved ones. So the three of you are an inspiration. Seeing families come together and go through this recovery journey, caring for your loved one, is just so inspiring. We always hear stories of, you know, the reality is there are a lot of caregivers who do it by themselves. I am very grateful and fortunate that, you know, my siblings and I have managed to band together to take care of my mom and my sister. But and seeing your family with the two of you brothers along with your mom, just thank you all so much for doing this panel with us tonight. Thank you so much again, Margaret, for writing this book, and thank you so much again to Word Image for helping, you know, have a portion of the proceeds to go towards our community at Cal and helping other families like ours. All of you an inspiration. Everyone in our chat is just singing your praises right now. I myself had to have a couple of moments where I was fighting tears back because I can totally relate about what was going on. So thank you so much, gentlemen. It's been such an honor meeting you. Thank you, Margaret, for allowing us to meet your family. And everyone else, if you have any additional questions, for Cal or for our panelists tonight, please feel free to write into us. We'll do our best to get back to you as and when we can. And in the meantime, I thank you all for being with us this evening, and we look forward to our next session. Do remember to sign up. You can see on screen right now, we are sharing the links to purchase the book. We also have a Mandarin version coming up, which will be touching on the struggles of caring for a loved one with schizophrenia and struggles and triumphs of a caregiver in Mandarin. So that will be, please help us spread the word to your friends and family who are more Mandarin speaking and would prefer to attend a panel where it's conducted in Chinese. Otherwise, thank you all so much once again, and I wish you all a safe week.